ignorant.
It's hard to imagine like hip-hop evolving in the Bronx if the Bronx were Westchester County. It's hard to imagine krautrock existing outside of post-World War II Germany without post-World War II Germany. Does that make any sense? The context in which these like radical art forms emerged was largely informed by the environment. I don't know if you necessarily need to have like severe trauma on a global level for it to change the way people think, but it will. It was like a cleanse to start new. Not the past, not the future, not somewhere else in the world, but here, and redefining what here meant.
So even when you hear krautrock today, it has this retro future quality. It felt like the future because it was sounds that no one ever heard before.
Berlin and new films of the bombed out city.
I grew up in Berlin, and that was during the war, basically, in a country which was in many aspects, not only in the physical aspects of the town in ruins, but the culture was in ruins. So of course that had a big influence on me. We wanted to do something which referred to our experience in a destructed Germany, in a devastated culture. And then came the year 68. In the late 60s, there was an atmosphere of changing your life, changing society, changing everything.
Orgy of vandalism, fire-raising, looting and killing broke out in retribution for the loss of Dr. King.
The late 60s was a time of the Cold War still, and you had the student risings in Germany, workers' demonstrations in Paris, you had students rising in America against Vietnam War. All the new ideas in art and politics, of course, gradually contested the conservative ideas of post-war Germany especially.
What you've got here is a generation of young people, young musicians, who are just coming of age in the late 60s, and they're the first generation to realise the horror of what happened in World War II, and this was something which their parents, their grandparents were involved in, but never discussed, and suddenly they're looking at them askance and thinking, my God, you never told us about this at the breakfast table. And this coincides with a time when there's a sort of general spirit of revolution in the air. Only in Germany, there is a particular connotation. For young people in Germany, actual ex-Nazis were running actual towns. Even the Chancellor of Germany at one point was an ex-Nazi. West Germany felt like an occupied country. You know, it's not just the physical occupation with the American troops on German soil. There's a sort of sense of cultural occupation, everything from sort of Coca-Cola to Eric Clapton, that is really, vexing to a lot of ambitious young German musicians.
My motivation was I wanted to make a music which brings jazz and rock and contemporary classical music all together. It was really professional musicians which decided to change their musical life. We wanted to find out what happened if we start just playing, not writing, rehearsing and then recording, but just playing and record everything. It was a total adventure. And finally it became Can. There was no band leader without any hierarchy. That is a political statement at that time.
We are young Germans. We've got to reconnect with our old traditions, re-establish a sense of German cultural pride. We are people who invent. We are kind of cultural instigators. We need to kind of create a music that is all German in origin in order that we can kind of culturally sort of begin again. Something that occurred separately to groups like Faust, to Kraftwerk, to Can, to Neu, all across the board.
I started as a member in Kraftwerk in 1971, stumbled into the studio more or less by chance and picked up a guitar and jammed with the guys, and everything just fell into place because we realized that there was something we had in common. Suddenly I met Klaus Dinger, my Neu partner. You get inspirations for music from many different fields, like also from different ages of music. Of course, it's impossible to imagine what I would think these days if I hadn't spent 1 year in England and 3 years in Pakistan as a child. Of course, it changed my view of the world. The most fascinating thing which I took from Pakistan was the experience of listening to that music, which is so amazingly beautiful and peaceful. Today, whenever I hear Indian music and Pakistan music, it helps me in really difficult times when I think I'm nearly snapping, and I put on that music that has a very long wave. It's something that centers me. It shaped my idea of a music which I wanted to create, not as a shadow of that music, but the idea of an endless wave. This is something that still appeals to me very strongly.
The partnership between guitarist Michael Rother and drummer Klaus Dinger was a very classic rock and roll yin and yang. Rother's thoughtful, hypnotic waves combined with the extroverted Dinger's powerful, incessant beat to form the style essential to the legacy of krautrock. Referring to the so-called motoric beat, Dinger once said, quote, "I've never called that beat motoric myself. That sounds more like a machine, and it was very much a human beat. Instead, I like to call it the endless straight. It's a feeling, like a picture, like driving down a long road or lane. It's essentially about life, how you have to keep moving, get on and stay in motion."
There still survive many of the ancient rites of the Aztecs, Mayans, and other Indian peoples who lived before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores.
Most probably all like folk music around the world has an inherent trance component, you know? Even if it's made out with a banjo, like Sandy Bull, or like an older stuff, or Tibetan music, they're all like intends to like separate people from their individual mind and gather them around a wider being or something called music, which is ultimately like a very ancestral human search of rhythm patterns that detonate like collective trance experiences, stuff like that. We believe that it's those guys in those krautrock days back in the 60s. For example, this German band called Popol Vuh talks about how they were like focusing on this kind of rhythm patterns that belong to this part of the world, you know, like South America, right? So this is a pretty interesting point, right? Like for example, the Aguirre movie with Klaus Kinski, it happens in South America, which is our land. Popol Vuh, I think, was doing the soundtrack for the film. So that again, like confirms our theory that Werner Herzog, like a filmmaker from the 60s, those guys were pretty like focusing on like what was going on anciently and musically and collective trances in the ancient South America. Sort of like an ancestral quotation of sounds plus like a futuristic new element, like the rise of synthesizers. So that's where we feel connected with them, and in the same time we feel like the music tries to involve the audience and ourselves in a more wider cosmic reality than the proper like material one. We operate sort of like a medium of something, because at some point, usually during our sets, we kind of lose control of what's going on. and maybe the audience takes control or something like that, and it develops it's sort of more like an abstract trip or something, an abstract collective trip, and when that's happening, it's definitely something not rational or not conscious, but it's guiding the whole experience. It's more like a collective spiritual situation, and psychologically we would say we're absent during our sets.
Bands like Noi and stuff like that, a lot of those bands had that approach in the sense that they didn't have so many changes as much. They just kind of drive and add more and more, take away things and so forth, but you just kind of zone out into it, you know. I never heard anything quite like that. Just hearing these songs would go on forever. It was like so ahead of its time, and there was something like really wild about that. They could be quite minimal at times, and it was like they would do like sort of a less is more approach. Sometimes they could be doing crazy stuff, but then sometimes it could just be one person doing like a halftime rhythm while the other guitarist would be doing like tremolo. It was almost like an illusion is what they were like creating, and to me it was sort of like an awakening. It was definitely a big moment in my life, you know. I realized you didn't have to throw the kitchen sink on things. I love the idea of not even having a change in a song, for instance. I really do. Like our first song on our first record, I started the song, everyone else kind of comes in gently, and like we reach like a peak and gently come down. I'm pretty much one of the last things that plays in it. I like that kind of linear aspect. Easier said than done. Just listening to it without even putting a time period on it is one thing, but then when you actually realize that some of these songs have been recorded in the 60s and so forth, it just sort of blew our mind. Just like...
We sort of created sound installations and recorded while walking around and playing something here, playing something there. We never cared if there were outside or environmental noises. The neighbor had a swimming pool, you heard the kids, and we didn't care. They are on the record. It was the ambience which made the music. It's what was called in the music since the 50s concrete music. Environmental can become part of music.
Number one favorite noise song, it's gotta be Hallo Gallo. That's my biggest influence, I feel like. For me, they're like the ultimate krautrock band. Very plain mission statement, just like driving, forward moving. But it doesn't feel like frantic or hectic at all. You know, it's goes along at like a real steady pace, and every sound is just incredible. I feel like it's just the song that kind of sums up krautrock. I always wanted to cover it. What is it that makes this song and not something else? You know, is it these words? Is it this phrase? Is it this drum beat? Like, what is this song?
Okay, it's cool if I just do another track on top of that?
You know, I'm sure it can happen with any type of music, but like the more repetitive it is, it taps into that trance-like states while playing music or watching music. There's something like innate in our human genealogy that kind of thing triggers, you know. In terms of DIIV, I think krautrock influenced our music in a number of ways besides just, you know, the drum beat. That's a big part of it, but it's not such a surface level thing. It has more to do with their tendency to just get rid of pop structure completely. No big changes, no verses, choruses, and just kind of have songs feel like it evolves organically in a cooler way. Less is more. Some rock and roll band has a guitar riff with 10 notes, they'll do a guitar riff with 2 notes, and it serves the same purpose. Simplicity. The founding members of Can, the founding members of Kraftwerk, and eventually Noi were all students of Stockhausen. It really is about concrete music. Their goal was to like boil rock and roll down to its absolute essence. That's, for me, my favorite part about that kind of music.
Krautrock perhaps means to a lot of people the motoric beat, which I think is an immediate and very attractive alternative to the conventional rock format with this kind of driving ding 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 ding, which is deceptively simple, but the implications of that beat are that it reconfigures completely the shape of a rock song. Very kind of linear approach to making music, which you can kind of build up to this kind of infinite progress.
Basically, because of Jackie's drumming, whenever there was a rhythm, it was very repetitive, very hypnotic. Yeah, definitely the groove was the basis.
By tearing down traditional pop structures and uncovering sounds new and ancient, krautrock bands unlocked a portal to a whole universe to be discovered by genres of music yet to be invented. In the Bronx, during the birth of hip-hop, pioneering DJ Afrika Bambaataa sampled Kraftwerk to make the beat for Planet Rock, one of the foundational songs in hip-hop history.
The song Spiders on A Ghost is Born, in terms of how visible influences become. Certainly the drum pattern has a lineage to the Apache beat or the motoric beat from Noi records in particular, early Kraftwerk records. The length of the song, the inspiration isn't necessarily to recreate the actual tones or musical characteristics, but for me, the inspiration is to emulate the mindset that allows you to make something that is rock and roll that doesn't sound like any other rock and roll.
It's also got one of the best guitar solos ever.
Aw, I'm your dad.
As a drummer, I really appreciate the motoric style because it lets me participate in something meditative or trance-like, and it's easy to get there when you're playing really, really repetitive music. The idea that a song doesn't have to be constrained by like the traditional structures, I think, is something that like opened people's minds when people were starting to make that music.
And like a lot of process-driven art, it's a limitation that leads to some deeper creative force, you know? It's just like an instinct, because you're cutting the ego out, trying to subvert the ego.
A lot of the time, when we're on tour, to kill time between soundcheck and a show, we'll go to like a record store, bookstore, whatever. I feel like we kept buying a lot of soundtracks. Every record store has like 17 different soundtracks by Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, exactly.
They put out hundreds of records.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Like every soundtrack, I feel like ever in the 80s.
It's too far across the place. It's
a lot of cosmic design and space stuff is factored into Caveman, definitely. I've always just been a big fan of improvised music, and something about improvised visuals really suits me. Just jamming on visuals.
If you look back at album art that I see in krautrock, the Popova, like the landscapes, kind of remind me of the trees on the second record.
We always would like get into spacey stuff, like with crazy neon lights and everything. I think there's like definitely the Tangerine Dream albums have that look to it.
So epic and so designed, so symmetrical and repeating, and it's really like these textures and symbols that feel like they came from just a different place entirely. They're not really of this earth.
So sometimes with bands, I like just pulling imagery that's in the room, like you get this little gargoyle here, and it will come through my visuals program, get trippy, get krautrocky, and then straight out to the live visuals for people to see. Part of the improvisational nature of it goes with the sort of jam sessions. When a band gets into the 5 minutes of a song, up to 10 minutes of a song, you know, you don't want to be seeing the same little loop. You want it to be evolving.
One thing a lot of these records have in common is that when you put them on, it's so transporting. It's pretty easy to get lost in them. You sometimes land somewhere you didn't expect to.
When people ask us what our inspirations are, the answer is always like our keyboards. I continue to buy new keyboards because I feel so inspired when I have a new toy to play with. This is the Juno 60, the Roland, and this is the OB8. It's a classic. Being children in the 80s, I think we were all super aware of Kraftwerk. I remember the first time I ever heard Kraftwerk on the radio, and I was like, what is this song? This is crazy, this is amazing. And it was just when I was first getting into Suicide and Can and like other keyboard bands. I think that was a big influence.
Hearing bands like that definitely made us less afraid to have songs like that with these long,
more open
middle
spaces.
bridges
Yeah,
of the song.
Yeah.
The drone is kind of what our unifying force is in our music.
Repetition, one thing staying static while the other things move around it, and that's a lot of what creates the trance-like quality. Not to be confused with trance music. It does become like a physical thing. You feel like you're just swimming in the sound.
I feel like we don't write the songs, we kind of discover the songs, and we'll spend hours figuring out the next chord of a song based on how they sound and how they sound together. But it almost seems like it's out of our control.
Yeah, definitely some of our favorite songs have been written as just jams. The fun part, I guess, is the mystery of these synthesizers and like what you can find inside them, and like just that kind of search is really satisfying.
I tried not to expect anything really when I came to China, but I was really surprised that the audiences were so wild. I tried to concentrate on things we have in common instead of what separates us. The love for music, love for joy is something that just connects us, and so that's also one of the reasons why I enjoy playing live. Watching people, you get an immediate idea of what the music makes people experience. I mean, the reception was amazingly positive.
对，然后我其实很开心的一件事情，就是去年年底的是 None 的主脑，然后他来演出，然后其实他也演了很多像这张唱片里的，其实真的是我20岁的时候很喜欢的那些歌曲，但是我觉得来说，其实每一支在那个时期德国前卫摇滚乐队的，他们的想法可能会比较相近。但是都不太一样，然后他们的想法，还有他们使用的音乐元素，还有他们的一些突破和创新，我觉得会在很多新乐队里面的某一个细节或者某一个部分，比如说像是音色，像是结构，然后或是旋律。可能就是在那个时期的德国乐队的想法，他们会真的很想去突破，做出属于自己的东西。所以听完他们的音乐，我也会想，我要做出我可能是我们乐队，然后找到我们自己的声音，可能应该是谁都不像。REVOIR 是4个人的乐队，然后我们从来都不认为我们是一个什么的乐队，对，反正就每一首歌都有每个人的，然后可以很具体到一个细节的想法。当他们组合起来的时候，可能反而会是一个属于很独特、属于REVOIR的一个声音，对。对，
对，因为我其实认为就是那个时代的德国的那些乐队，然后给迷幻音乐其实也展示了向以后去发展的方向。音乐其实当时听这些音乐都会给我带来很大的影响。
The greatest impact any piece of art or music can have is to help someone think something they wouldn't have thought otherwise. While I don't live in like post-World War II Germany, I think the world we're living in is just as much in an identity crisis about who we are and what we do. Most people hate their governments and most people hate like the corporate influence on things, but you have to think about what your role in it is and how your voice and your lifestyle can try to help change the negative aspects of the system that you are a part of. And I think that had a lot to do with like how krautrock came about and why it was so influential, because it was like, we do not want to be that, and we are going to do everything we can to create a new that. It's a cycle. The social movement influences the art, and the art influences the social movement. It's the endless cycle. And I think that the people who make krautrock would look forward to the time where there's a new thing that throws away that rule book and starts fresh. There was a time before hip-hop, before it existed. There was a time before jazz. There was a time before photography. There was a time before poetry, if you go farther back. What are we on the cusp of?
By starting from a clean slate, krautrock managed to inspire numerous genres of music by reminding us why music matters in the first place, not only as a way of identifying yourself, but as a tool for transcending your own identity, becoming one with the greater whole. Noi, Kraftwerk, Can, Cluster, Armandur, Ashra Temple, Embryo, etc., Faust, Hila, Cosmic Jokers, Guru Guru, Harmonia, Limbus, Nectar, Klaus Schultz, Show Caravan, La Dusseldorf, Flor de Cologne, Konrad Schnitzler, Popol Vuh, and Tangerine Dream. German krautrock.